The CEO thought removing my name would remove my control. He didn't realize the system didn't recognize titles, only authority. By the time they noticed, nothing inside the company worked the way it used to. And it all started with a sound that wasn't even meant to be dramatic. The first sound wasn't his voice. It was the soft, almost polite click of a folder being closed. That sound landed before the words did, before the meaning caught up, before my brain had time to build defenses. A thin, final sound, like punctuation. Then Marcus Hales spoke. Effective immediately, Dana West is no longer employed by Apex Nova. He said it the way surgeons announce a procedure, clean, practiced, emotionally distant. Not cruel. Worse. Efficient. For half a second, the boardroom stopped functioning like a room meant for humans. Charts froze on the projector mid-animation. A pen hovered above a legal pad, forgotten. Someone's phone vibrated once and was immediately silenced, as if even technology sensed it shouldn't interrupt this moment. No one looked at me. That was the detail I noticed first. Not the words, not the heat crawling up my neck. The fact that 12 people who had spent years saying my name suddenly found the tabletop fascinating. Marcus didn't look at me either. He stared straight ahead, hands folded neatly, already moving on in his mind. To him, I wasn't a person. I was a complication that had finally been resolved. 6 years. That's how long it took to reduce me to a sentence. 6 years of building Apex Nova's modular platform, line by line, decision by decision, contract by contract, compressed into 8 sterile words. No warning, no conversation, just a public erasure performed in front of the people who had approved every late-night budget exception I'd begged for on the system's behalf. I waited, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew what they expected me to say. Shock, anger, negotiation, tears if I was feeling generous. Instead, I gathered my notes. I stood. I straightened my jacket. And I said quietly, "Thank you." The word didn't belong in the room. You could feel that immediately. A few people shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. Someone mistook it for surrender. Someone else mistook it for professionalism. Marcus didn't react at all. He thought the story had ended. It hadn't. The silence followed me down the hallway like a shadow that refused to let go. The kind of silence that feels heavier than noise, pressing against your ears until you start questioning whether the world is still moving without you. The elevator ride took 34 seconds. I counted them. In the parking garage, I sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel long after the engine should have started. The building loomed ahead of me, glass, steel, confidence. For 6 years, I had been its spine, the thing no one saw until it cracked. And in less than a minute, Marcus Hale had decided the company could stand upright without bones. I laughed once, softly. The sound surprised me. Then my phone began to buzz. Not condolences, not sympathy. Confusion. Logan texted first. "Are we even allowed to keep working on the code?" Priya followed seconds later. "HR says everything is paused until new leadership oversight is clarified." Dylan, never one for wasted words. Guess we're disposable after all. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening with every message. These were some of the sharpest engineers I'd ever worked with. People who had carried impossible deadlines without complaint because they believed the work mattered. Now they sounded like soldiers abandoned mid-battle. I typed responses, deleted them, typed again, deleted those too. What comfort could I offer when I didn't even understand the rules anymore? I had built a protected ecosystem around them for years, buffered executive nonsense, translated jargon into reality, absorbed blame so they could keep building. And now, with me gone, the noise rushed in immediately. The guilt hit harder than the firing. Had my silence in that room condemned them? Had I mistaken restraint for strength? For the first time since Marcus snapped that folder shut, doubt crept in. Maybe leadership really was interchangeable. Maybe all those nights I spent arguing for architectural integrity instead of shortcuts had only delayed the inevitable. Maybe the company didn't need me, just someone willing to smile convincingly while things quietly fell apart. The thought lingered longer than I liked. At 3:07 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Jason, the intern. He wasn't supposed to know anything beyond QA checklists and bug triage. He'd joined the team 3 months earlier, quiet, observant, always sitting a little too still during meetings, as if afraid movement might draw attention. His message was short. They don't know who holds the original patent, do they? I felt it before I understood it. That sudden drop in your stomach when gravity changes direction. I reread the message. Once. Twice. My hands went cold. Jason was right. Marcus didn't know. The board didn't know. Legal didn't know. During the budget collapse 2 years earlier, when half the company was bracing for layoffs and the rest were pretending not to notice, I had done something no one else thought necessary. I had prepared. The modular system hadn't been filed under Apex Nova directly. Not fully. The original framework, the licensing structure, the survivability clauses, they lived elsewhere, under a separate entity, a precaution at the time, a footnote everyone had signed without reading. I closed my eyes. The silence that had felt like a tomb cracked open. Leverage doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives as recognition. That night, my apartment looked less like a home and more like an evidence locker. Folders sprawled across the kitchen table, contracts stacked in uneven piles, binders dragged from storage boxes and dumped onto the floor. Coffee rings stained the margins of documents I had once defended in meetings that lasted longer than some marriages. The lamp flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the mess. Somewhere across the city, Marcus Hale was probably rehearsing talking points for investors, sipping something expensive, convinced he had executed a clean operation. He had the skyline. I had peeling paint and paperwork. The irony almost made me smile. Every so often, my phone buzzed with another anxious message from the team. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because reassurance would have been dishonest. I didn't know how this would end yet. All I knew was that they had cut me loose without checking what was still tied to my name. Doubt returned as the hours passed. Fatigue sharpened it. Maybe I was clinging to a technicality. Maybe legal would find a way around it. Maybe the clause I remembered wasn't as airtight as it felt in memory. Then I opened the envelope. It was yellowed at the edges, tucked beneath old quarterly reports like something deliberately hidden. Inside was a printed email, time-stamped 2 years earlier. I remembered that night immediately. Finance had announced a realignment. Translation. Our project was about to be starved quietly. I had stayed up until dawn drafting an alternate framework, one that rooted the system through a separate legal entity to protect its continuity. My pulse quickened as I read. Halfway down the page, buried between polite corporate phrasing, sat the sentence that changed everything. In the event of termination of project funding or leadership oversight, all rights revert to the original architect until full reintegration is executed. I set the paper down. My hands were trembling. Marcus thought firing me was efficiency. He thought public humiliation erased preparation. What he didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that removing me had triggered the very clause designed for betrayal. The apartment didn't change, still small, still cluttered, still quiet, but it no longer felt like a place I was trapped. It felt like a command center. 9 days later, the first crack appeared. I wasn't there to see it, but I didn't need to be. The investor demo froze mid-sequence, a single line of text glowing across the pristine white screen. License authorization expired. Marcus laughed it off at first. 2 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Every click produced the same result. From my chair, miles away, I watched updates roll in through a Slack channel no one had bothered to remove me from. "They're sweating," Logan typed. "Ops can't access staging," Priya added. Dylan sent a single word. "Lock." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. For the first time since the boardroom, I didn't feel erased. I felt inevitable. The first rule of power is that it hates silence. When something stops responding, emails unanswered, dashboards frozen, licenses refusing to validate, people don't panic immediately. They rationalize. They explain. They assume someone else has already handled it. Marcus Hale lived in that assumption. From what filtered through the Slack channel, The morning after the failed demo began with optimism forced so hard it bordered on parody. Marcus addressed the floor with a confident smile, voice loud enough to reach the engineers huddled near the back. "Minor authorization issue," he announced. "Already being resolved." Resolved by whom, no one could quite tell. Ops scrambled. Legal stalled. Engineering waited for direction that never came. The system wasn't broken. It was obedient. It was doing exactly what it had been designed to do when accessed without authority. Marcus mistook compliance for malfunction. By noon, investors were calling. By 1, the board was asking questions Marcus didn't know how to answer without admitting ignorance. By 2, he had done what executives always do when reality refuses to cooperate. He blamed process. I knew this because human resources called me at 2:37 p.m. I watched the phone ring twice before answering. "Dana," the voice was warm, rehearsed. "Hi, this is Karen from HR. How are you holding up?" Concern delivered on schedule. "I'm fine," I said. "Oh, good, good." She rushed forward, relieved. "Listen, the last few days have been challenging. Leadership has been discussing how best to restore continuity." Restore continuity. Such a gentle phrase for panic. "We were hoping," she continued, "that you might be open to a conversation, just to align, clear up any misunderstandings." I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting to the stack of contracts still spread across my table. "You want me back," I said, a pause just long enough. "Well," she said carefully, "we believe your presence could be stabilizing. The team clearly respects you. Investors value—" "You fired me in front of the board," I interrupted. "That wasn't a misunderstanding." Silence stretched. "Compensation adjustments are on the table," she said finally. "We're prepared to be flexible." There it was, the assumption that money could undo certainty. I let the quiet settle between us, long enough for discomfort to bloom on the other end of the line. "You don't have enough money," I said. Excuse me?" "You don't have enough money to buy back the years," I continued evenly. "Or the system, or my silence." Her breath hitched. She was searching for language that didn't exist in her script. "I think we should loop Marcus in." "No," I said. "You shouldn't." I ended the call before she could recover. No raised voice. No threats, just refusal. That evening, an email appeared in my inbox with a subject line that made me sit straighter. Invitation to discuss strategic alignment. The sender wasn't Apex Nova. It was Ardent Dynamics. I didn't open it immediately. Competitors don't reach out unless they smell blood or opportunity, often both. When I did open it, the message was brief. "We understand the current turbulence. If you're open to dialogue, we'd like to meet. C. Dalton." The name stirred something old. Chris Dalton had once sat 2 rows over from me during architecture reviews. Sharp mind. Sharper tongue. Marcus had labeled him difficult during a restructuring and cut him loose with a handshake and a smile. Chris hadn't smiled back. Now he was at Ardent. I agreed to coffee. The cafe sat at the edge of downtown, quiet enough to disappear into. Chris arrived early, already seated, jacket slung over the back of the chair. He looked older. Smarter, too. "Dana West," he said, standing. "Didn't think I'd see you on the outside." "Life surprises," I replied. He smiled. Marcus always did have a talent for ejecting the wrong people. We didn't bother with small talk. "Ardent wants what you built," Chris said plainly. "We've followed the fallout. Investors whisper, clients hesitate. But you and I both know the system doesn't move without you." "What makes you so sure?" I asked. He slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a familiar document, a licensing agreement I had drafted 2 years earlier. Clause highlighted. "Marcus doesn't know," Chris said. "Does he? That the authority roots through you?" I didn't answer. Chris leaned back, satisfied. "The question isn't whether the system works, it's who it works for." I sipped my coffee, buying time. Curiosity flickered beneath caution. For the first time, someone outside Apex Nova spoke the truth out loud. The next morning, the headlines told a different story. Apex Nova restores stability after brief disruption. Marcus's face dominated the articles, confident, composed, triumphant. He had staged a partial demo environment and called it a fix. The board exhaled. Investors relaxed. The narrative bent back into shape. Even my team was confused. Did he actually fix it? Logan asked. Priya sent a single question mark. I stared at the screen, unease tightening my stomach. A system isn't restored by pretending contracts don't exist. Whatever Marcus had paraded was a shell, and shells crack. At 9:17 a.m. the next day, the system collapsed completely. Not a freeze, not a delay, total failure. Demo environments went dark. Client sandboxes vanished. Even internal staging locked itself down with mechanical indifference. License authorization expired. The message bloomed across screens like a verdict. Panic erupted inside Apex Nova's walls. Dylan messaged me first. He's losing it. They can't access anything, not even staging. By noon, reporters were circling. By mid-afternoon, the boardroom had turned hostile. Marcus tried to bluff, shouting about sabotage, glitches, malicious actors, but no one was listening anymore. Someone demanded logs. Someone else demanded legal confirmation. That's when the truth surfaced. The restoration had been theater, no legal authorization, no real access, just optics. You misled us, a director said aloud. Marcus's face drained of color. I watched the updates roll in from my apartment, the chaos rippling outward. For the first time, it wasn't my chaos to absorb. The system was protecting itself, and Marcus Hale had been unmasked. The call from the board came that evening. They wanted me in the executive chamber by morning. I arrived early, walking past familiar faces that suddenly found their shoes interesting. The air felt charged, brittle. Inside the boardroom, arrogance had evaporated. Fear remained. Marcus stood near the doorway, rigid. "Dana," the chairman said carefully. "Thank you for coming." "I'm not here to return," I said, placing my folder on the table. A murmur rippled. "I will not restore access," I continued, "but I will offer you an outcome." Marcus found his voice. "You can't. We're listening," the chairman snapped. I met their eyes, calm. "I'm selling the patent." Silence detonated. "You don't have the authority," Marcus protested, desperation cracking his tone. I slid the documents forward. Their signatures, their approvals, their oversight failures. Authority was never the issue. "This isn't a negotiation," I said. "It's the conclusion." 2 days later, I stood in Ardent Dynamics' marble lobby. Chris waited, grinning. "They know you won." Upstairs, the contract lay open, numbers large enough to feel unreal. I hesitated, not because of money, but purpose. I slid a second page forward. "My condition," I said. "I don't disappear, I guard what I built." Chris nodded slowly. "I expected nothing less." When I signed, the weight lifted, not as triumph, but closure. 14 days after Marcus fired me, Apex Nova unraveled. Stock plummeted. Partners fled. Marcus resigned. I watched the press conference from my apartment. Marcus sat hollow-eyed, shrinking from cameras. Then it was my turn. Lights, microphones, silence. I said one word. "Thank you." Not for the fall. For the power they handed me when they thought I was finished. The morning Apex Nova announced Marcus Hale's resignation. The stock dropped another 8% before noon. The market didn't panic. It corrected. That distinction mattered more than people realized. Panic is emotional. Correction is judgment. By the time the press conference aired, the narrative had already calcified. A visionary CEO who moved too fast, a technical failure no one anticipated, an unfortunate oversight. The language was carefully chosen, polished until it no longer resembled the truth. Marcus stood behind the podium like a man wearing someone else's suit. The confidence was gone. His voice still worked, but the authority behind it had evaporated. I watched from my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, papers finally stacked instead of scattered. For the first time in weeks, my apartment felt quiet in a way that wasn't oppressive. The empire he'd strutted into had collapsed under its own negligence. Not because of sabotage, not because of revenge, because no one had bothered to read the fine print. That afternoon, the board's final message arrived. No legal threats, no posturing, just a request. We acknowledge the outcome. We'd like to discuss transition logistics. Translation, they had run out of leverage. I didn't respond. 2 days later, Ardent Dynamics' legal team finalized the transfer. The patent sale wasn't dramatic. No champagne, no applause. Just signatures, timestamps, and the quiet click of authority changing hands. The number attached to my name was absurd, large enough to alter the trajectory of several lifetimes, but it barely registered. Money has a way of shrinking when it isn't the thing you're actually chasing. What mattered was the clause. My clause. I wasn't an employee. I wasn't an executive mascot. I wasn't a consultant rolled out for optics. I was the guardian. The architecture couldn't be modified, licensed, or repurposed without my oversight. No shortcuts, no dilution, no pretending understanding where there was none. Chris read the page twice, then once more. "You realize most people would have taken the money and vanished," he said. "I know," I replied. "Why didn't you?" I considered the question longer than he expected. "Because disappearing is how this keeps happening." He nodded, slow and thoughtful. The headlines changed tone within a week. Apex Nova loses core patent. Former architect secures historic deal. Lessons in leadership and oversight. They never said my name correctly at first. Some outlets called me a disgruntled former employee. Others framed it as a vendetta. None of that lasted. Facts have a way of outliving narrative. The engineers reached out quietly, one by one. Logan thanked me for protecting the work. Priya said she'd accepted a new role, one that respected her boundaries. Dylan sent a single message. "You were right." Jason emailed last. He apologized for asking the question, as if curiosity required permission. I told him never to lose it. Weeks passed. Then months. The system evolved under new stewardship, not faster, not flashier, but cleaner, thoughtful, built to last instead of impress. I wasn't in the room anymore. That was the point. Power, I had learned, doesn't need proximity. One evening, long after the noise had died down, I stood by my window watching the city flicker to life below. Deadlines still existed. Corporations still rose and fell. Executives still mistook authority for comprehension. But none of that pressed against my chest the way it once had. I thought back to the boardroom, the folder snapping shut, the sentence that erased me. Marcus had believed firing me was efficiency. He had believed power lived in the chair at the head of the table. What he never understood was this. Power lives with the people who prepare quietly, with the ones who read every clause, with the ones who build systems strong enough to outlive titles. I hadn't won by shouting. I hadn't won by burning anything down. I had won by refusing to disappear. If there's anything worth taking from this story, it isn't strategy or cautionary spectacle. It's this. Your worth is not decided in someone else's boardroom. It's decided in what you choose to build and whether you protect it. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's authorship. And sometimes the most dangerous words you can say, calmly and without apology, are the ones I whispered that day as they thought they were ending me. Thank you, because that was the moment they handed me everything.